Hello and welcome to this last edition of this series, contextualizing Africa and digitalization and the intersection of communicative technology. In this last series, I'll be addressing digital rights because digital rights has increasingly become the tenets of humanity, between humanity and technology. And with this, I will particularly be focusing on safety online for marginalized groups of women, girls, and of course marginalized communities. So what are these digital rights? And where does the context come from? So cyber rights or digital rights recognize the right of individuals to access, to use, to create and publish digital media, and the right of access to the computers, electronic devices, telecommunications and network and necessary to exercise them. So what are digital rights for? Digital rights are merely an extension of the rights that are set out by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations is applied to the online world. Its main objective is to guarantee access to the internet, avoiding the so-called digital divide and the proper use of the network as a common asset belonging to the whole of humanity. This is a technical definition. So largely, digital technologies are transforming the way basic rights such as freedom of expression and access to information are exercised, are protected, and also violated, and are also leading to the recognition of these new rights. Universal laws should therefore adopt this new era with the development of digital rights and digital citizenship, allowing and regulating access to online information in a secure and transparent manner. It is also very known that the internet and its associated technologies have also opened up doors to new and reconfigured forms of abuse. And these technical affordances allows perpetrators to hide under the cloak of anonymity, yet inflicting harm on unsuspecting victims and targets. These digitally enabled abusive and manipulative behaviors constitute infringements on the rights and freedoms, particularly of women, girls, and those marginalized. For this lecture, I have promised I will be focusing on online, what is termed as online gender-based violence. Online gender-based violence manifests in many forms, such as intimate partner violence, stalking, sexual harassment. What is key is that it is facilitated by the use of digital tools, such as social media and GPS tracking, non-consensual sharing of intimate images, or what is known as porn, revenge porn, or image-based sexual abuse, threats of rape and gruesome death that often translate in a real world of actions. These digitally enabled forms of harassment are mostly experienced by women and girls. Acts such as doxing, trolling, hate speech, exploitation are also recognized as online gender-based violence, which disproportionately affect women. And beside the term online gender-based violence, there are several other concepts which are often used synonymously to refer to the same phenomenon. So it is crucial to emphasize that although the scourge of violence online is gendered, men and boys are also victims of this emerging practice. I've already mentioned cyber harassment, cyberbullying, hate speech, cyber stalking, non-consensual pornography, trolling, doxing, amongst others. But does it just end here? This scourge is so huge that the UN, as the global governing body, has taken note of. The US Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, in 2021, has highlighted that online violence was amongst the violent acts that have thrived during the COVID-19 pandemic. He also called on everyone to urgently work towards redressing this social crisis. Apart from the UN Secretary General, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women in her 2018 report stated that consequences of harm caused by different manifestations of online violences are specifically gendered, given that women and girls suffer from particular stigma in the context of structural inequality, discrimination, and patriarchy. UNESCO, in 2021, published a discussion paper with the International Center for Journalists that indicates that there is widespread instances of online violence against female journalists in particular, and these causes psychological, physical, professional, and digital safety and security impacts. And this is associated with the escalating of freedom of expression, and gender equality crises are converging in a complex way. Furthermore, that report by UNESCO and ICFJ goes on to highlight that any kind of response to the matter is highly complicated due to the intersectionality nature. So what does online gender-based violence, or this online violence, looks particularly for women within the African setting? So online gender-based violence, obviously, as I've mentioned, is a global phenomenon, and African continent is not spared from this structural problem. It is of particular concern in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where the gender divide, or gender digital divide, stands at 37%. And to this, the African Union has identified a number of strategies to eliminate gender disparity as one of its top focus, and it has also singled out harmful cultural practices and behaviors as contributing factors to the normalization of online gender-based violence, and has proposed prolonged approach to tackling the matter. Scientifically, little is very known about this social crisis, yet it affects women and girls, and who are the bulk of the population in the global south. The lack of comprehensive research in this area with huge societal implication has been concerning, and speculations are that online gender-based violence is prevalent in societies with little to no intervention, where active intervention is very rife. So on these, the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, with funding from Meta, Southern Africa, Public Policy, and a number of organizations within Eastern Southern Africa, has come together in a multi-stakeholder format to produce a report that is currently published under the Center for Human Rights. That report was an initiative of myself and was contributed by a number of researchers within from Africa. I'll be able to share with you this report with you. So it is known and understood that the internet is being used for the violences as highlighted before, but it has also become a space where activists stand up against social ills, even online gender-based violence. What is known particularly from the Africa setting in southern, particularly the eight southern African countries that we focused in this research, we have found out that revenge porn is possibly the most known violence against women and girls online. But as we recognize revenge porn, other types of abuse is also targeted towards indigenous women, the vulnerable, and the minorities onto the internet. For instance, in Namibia, we found photos of Ahimba girls, even underage girls, though their photos being used and placed on pornographic websites in countries such as France, just amongst others. But also in addressing digital rights, we also found out that the online gender-based violence is not only restricted to women who are willingly on social media platforms or onto the internet, but also those who have never intended to be online. A case in particular is we had an old lady called Vivi, Auntie Vivi rather. And this lady has died a few years ago in Namibia, I think over 7 years ago. What has previously happened was patrons would buy her alcohol and she would be recorded saying profane things, and they will be posted online for the entertainment of those patrons that pays for her drinks and literally feed her alcohol. And this is not just her. Many vulnerable communities, not just in Namibia, but everywhere in many of the African countries, demonstrates this particular behavior that is ill and dangerous for those who are online. So in this particular setting, the rights to consent, the rights to be forgotten, for instance, onto the internet, is completely ignored. Another case that we have picked up is, again, vulnerable children who are put onto the internet for the sake of maybe saying things that are funny, and are put onto the internet because they have not reached the age of setting up social media accounts. Their digital IDs remains onto the internet, one, without their consent, two, without them being able to do something about it. But we also find out, for instance, is that online violence is also particularly targeting prominent women and girls in a very misogynist, abusive manner. So we found out, for instance, a number of cases in Botswana through our research. We found out journalists are constantly being abused and violated online. There was a specific case of a female journalist who has been, for instance, sent a coffin when they covered a specific sensitive story. In Namibia, we've picked up a number of stories where female politicians in particular get targeted by the abuse. They compared to animals as a way of taking away their voices and comparing them to being inhuman. So journalists, as I've mentioned, other prominent women within society, such as beauty pageants, women in politics, literally every visible woman in society are constantly targeted by gendered misinformation as well as misogynist abuse. So what are some of the responses that we're finding out from regarding the media, for instance, and particular government as key custodians in making sure that human rights and are protected, whether offline or online? What we're picking up, for instance, is that government has started to make pronouncements that seemingly shows that they are aware of this social ill. However, there seems to be a challenge with them finding in practical interventions in protecting women and girls. So in moving forward, we have a case study, and we also a number of case studies across the Southern Africa, and then we'll be able to share this with you through the report that I've mentioned. But I want to look at the findings, pay attention to 4 of the findings that I think are very important for this engagement. So number 1 is that women in politics, as well as those in prominent spaces such as journalists, artists, beauty industry, are subjected to a lot more violence as a result of their prominence. Gendered insults, misinformation have also become very regular, and with those with access and meanings to the law, finds pursuing recourse under common law, but the laws across the 8 Southern African countries that we have covered are very silent on how women and girls can seek recourse using digitally focused laws. Also, various organizations, individuals and officials of government have begun to engage on the subject matter, prominently urging for clear interventions. The development of those clear interventions is not what we are finding. Furthermore, government has also been making pronouncements on these issues and has ensured some provisions in existing laws. However, the practical enforcement is yet to bear fruit for women and girls who are surviving online violence. So what are some of the recommendations? I think I'll focus particularly on recommendations for the media, as well as the social media platforms where the violence is taking place. So recommendations are asking that social media networks or social media platforms must work with local stakeholders to ensure that the online rights of individuals are upheld, that the social media networks should provide transparent reports about the violences that are reported within the country and work with local stakeholders in publicizing that. And the social media networks must work with local actors to understand the local nuances and textures of the violences online. And then they must also work with regulators to disempower violators, working on local stakeholders. Specific recommendations for the media includes that the media can provide education on online violence by articulating clearly what preventions are, what prosecution methods are, as well as meaningful engagement online. So media training on digital rights and social media safety is also needed to develop local guidelines to complement, for instance, work that is done by UNESCO and partners globally, and that investigating reporting on how cases of online violence are dealt with and their detrimental effect on society is needed. Furthermore, media is advised to adopt safety policies, particularly protecting female journalists, but also seeking the support of male journalists. This is all I end here with our series of public lectures for today. As you can remember right from the beginning, we provided context on how digitalization is being approached by different African governments, by illustrating the Namibia case of trying to find out opportunities to benefit from rapid technological advancement. I then moved on to clearly stipulate what an open and inclusive internet would look like and what sort of benefit could afford for Africa. I have, in my last session, I have sort of intersected the issues of public of platform communication. As known, communication in the 21st century is increasingly become very platform-based onto the internet, but those same platforms are perpetuating colonial dimensions and hence not providing fruitful benefits for users, particularly from the global south. And here I've also just intersected or sort of laid out some of the specific cases of how online violence takes place. And with online violence targeting women and girls, that means that women and girls leave platforms. For women in politics, for instance, they lose an opportunity to engage with their electorate. But also for women journalists, loses an opportunity to understand what are the discourses look like online for their stories, to get rid of their sources and really take away the voices from women and undoing all the progresses of, for instance, Beijing declarations, just amongst others. Well, thank you, and I will hope to be sharing many of the publications that I've quoted in here, and I end here today. Thank you.